Hello, Star Wars fans. So I've been asked by several people, dude, where are your Maul Shadow Lord and Mandalorian and Grogu timeline videos? I'll admit, I've been dragging my feet because darn it, it's been getting harder and harder to place Star Wars entries in the timeline. But I'm finally going to do it. I think you'll enjoy this. Lots to discuss. So let's dive right in, see what we can find out. So, one of the things right off the bat that's very helpful in placing things in the Star Wars timeline is, of course, Disney Plus. In fact, you can see Maul Shadow Lord there in the timeline, and eventually Mandalorian and Grogu will show up in the bottom section down there. But the problem is, several entries, like Bad Batch and Mandalorian, for example, have multiple seasons. So, the question is, where does Maul Shadow Lord fit in relation to Bad Batch Season 3? And where does, for instance, Ahsoka fit within relation to Mandalorian Season 3? Well, one of the things I wish Lucasfilm would consider doing is what Marvel has done. They have given us this season by season timeline, and notice entries like Loki. They tell you where Loki season 1 occurs and season 2. So this would be very, very helpful. I really hope Lucasfilm considers it. Also, I wish Lucasfilm would do more of this. Andor was so helpful in giving us specific time frames. So, for example, here we see them saying 16 years ago, Grand Moff Tarkin killed 500 peaceful, unarmed Gormans in the middle of that plaza. And here again, we see them saying Krennic's had the lab working overtime all year. They gave us lots of specifics so we knew how the different episodes and how major events played out in relation to the show. I really wish they did more of that. So I want to encourage Lucasfilm, look at what they did in Andor. Please, please start doing that on a regular basis. But anyway, with that prefacing why it's difficult to place these things in the timeline, now let's move to our placement for Maul Shadow Lord. So in fact, picking right up with the point I was just making, wouldn't it have been incredible if Maul had referred to how long had transpired since the end of Clone Wars Season 7, right? Remember, Ahsoka lets him out to create a diversion. Eventually, he decides, I'm out of here. Ahsoka tries to slow him down, but eventually he gets away. Wouldn't it have been awesome if somewhere during Maul Shadow Lord Season 1, he had referenced how long, specifically in years, has gone by since this event? Well, he didn't. So instead, we have to turn to the cast and the crew. So let's look and see what Sam Witwer said. I love this dude. He is so passionate about Star Wars and he is amazing, right? But even he was seemingly unsure of how much time had transpired. Somebody asked him, how much time is there since the Clone Wars? And he said, well, it takes place, what is it, about a year after Clone Wars? Yeah, that's it. I mean, again, I love the dude, but he had no clue, right? No one had prepped him with this answer. But I think the real issue is I don't know if Lucasfilm knew the answer, right? They don't seem as concerned about the timeline as I wish they were. But I will say, at least on StarWars.com, they gave us a vague answer. They told us that it is a few short years after Order 66. So that already seems to retcon what Sam Witwer said, right? He said it was only a year. They're saying a few short years. Well, what does that mean? Well, if we look at the dictionary, that could mean anywhere from 3 to 4. Because if we, kind of break this down, a couple is 2, a few is 3 to 4, several is 4 to 8, and a lot or a bunch is 10 plus. But then they do go on to say that there can be overlap between a few and a couple, so we could be anywhere from 2 to 5. Okay, that doesn't help much, although it is at least 2. That's the bottom line. So we're talking at least 2 years since the end of the Clone Wars. And of course, Clone Wars Season 7 culminated with Order 66, which we know is in 19 BBY. So if we go with the 2 to 5, that would place Maul Shadow Lord in either 17 BBY or could even be as late as 12 BBY. So, okay, somewhere between 17 and 12 BBY. All right, what else do we know? Well, in episode 9, we see that Dryden is still in charge of Crimson Dawn. And that's important because we know from the novel Crimson Climb that when Kira finally meets Maul, he's in charge of Crimson Dawn. So, okay, if we look at when this novel is happening, E.K. Johnson tells us it covers about a year and a half. It starts right after Kira is separated from Han and taking us up to the point where she's about to meet Maul for the first time. Okay, so if we turn to the timeline book, that happened in, they say circa, but still 13 BBY. Okay, so we have to narrow our gap a little bit. I said 17 to 12 BBY. Now we know it's got to be before 13 BBY because Maul is now in charge of Crimson Dawn. All right, so somewhere between 17 and 13 BBY. Can we narrow that a bit more? Well, yeah, I think we can, because Maul probably didn't take that long after the end of Clone Wars to plot his revenge, right? We see people continually saying to him, I will do whatever it takes to help you get your revenge, right? And Maul is quite happy about that. Dude really wants revenge. In fact, some people like Rook Cast are trying to tell him, don't spend so much time on revenge. But clearly, that was on his mind. Well, one would think he's not going to sit around for years and years. I mean, all the way to 13 BBY to start getting revenge? No, I think not. I mean, we're going to be probably closer to the 17 BBY timeframe. Because remember, again, at the end of Clone Wars Season 7, he escapes. Dude is going to sit around building his resources back again for a little while, but then he's going to be plotting his revenge. I'm going to say closer to 17 BBY. All right, is there anything else we can look at? Well, we do see the TK troopers in the episodes. That seems to put us after Bad Batch Season 3. That makes sense. We also see that the assault gunships are white. That's the main picture there. That's from, obviously, Maul Shadow Lord, but the inset, that's from Bad Batch, where they were gray. So something has changed there. Again, putting us after Bad Batch Season 3. And then finally, we have the Imperial-class Star Destroyers showing up at the end of Bad Batch Season 3. That really seemed like the official announcement that the Empire was here. So then when we see the Imperial-class Star Destroyer in Maul Shadow Lord, really feels like that's happening after Bad Batch Season 3. So I'm really, really convinced on that. So 17 BBY, again, is sounding really good. However, the biggest question is, does the Crow force Maul Shadow Lord to be in 18 BBY? Obviously, he shows up during Maul Shadow Lord, but he also shows up during Tales of the Jedi, in particular the final episode, right? Resolve. And, of course, he dies in that episode. So clearly Maul Shadow Lord has to happen before this episode. Well, here's the trick. This episode is theoretically the animated adaptation of the famous Ahsoka novel, right? And according to the timeline book, the Ahsoka novel happens in 18 BBY. Okay, so that would mean if the Crow dies in the animated adaptation of the novel that happens in 18 BBY, then clearly Maul Shadow Lord has to happen before 18 BBY, right? So we're done. It's over. We got the answer, 18 BBY, right? Well, it's not so easy because if we look at that Resolve episode, and in particular some of the comments, it kind of feels like Resolve is several years after Order 66. Okay, so here we see the farmers saying no one can keep up with the Imperial quotas. And then they say it gets more difficult every season. I wish they would have said year, but these are farmers. They don't think in years, they think in seasons. So theoretically, a season is a full rotation, i.e. a year. And they're saying it gets more difficult every, basically, year. That would imply more than 1 year. I mean, this scene probably is not happening in 18 BBY. Likewise, they say in the beginning, you all welcome the Empire. Well, that implies we're no longer in the beginning. So 18 BBY doesn't make a lot of sense. And then when Bail Organa shows up to try to get Ahsoka to rejoin the fight, if you will, again, something that happens in the novel, he says things have only gotten worse. That sure makes it sound like time has gone by. You wouldn't really say that in 18 BBY, right? You would say that more like in, 12 BBY, let's say. So then finally he says, are you ready to get back in and join the fight? So I have placed this episode in 19 and 12 BBY. Obviously, it begins right after Revenge of the Sith, but it then, I think, jumps several years forward. I just picked 12 BBY to split the difference between 18 BBY when the novel happens, and then 5 BBY, which is Rebels, when we know she's rejoined the fight, right? So I just picked somewhere in the middle. But I think that maybe they're retconning the novel or changing the end of the novel to have, Ahsoka join the fight a little bit later in the timeline. But here's the big point. If it's, let's just say 12 BBY, then that means Maul Shadow Lord can happen in 17 BBY because we don't have to worry about the Crow dying in 18 BBY. My word, this is really complicated, right? Well, anyway, bottom line is I agree with Wikipedia. Wikipedia places Maul Shadow Lord in 17 BBY. Notice they put circa because it's kind of hard to tell, but they say 17 BBY, and I agree with that analysis. Likewise, they do point out that it's after the Star Wars Tales of the Empire episode Realization, which of course is the final episode with Barriss. So I also agree with that. I think that Realization is happening, looks like just prior to Maul Shadow Lord. In fact, I put it in 17 BBY as well, but you could go either way. I mean, it's at the very end of 18 BBY or beginning of 17 BBY. So, okay, that is where I'm going to place Maul Shadow Lord, 17 BBY. So now let's talk about Mandalorian and Grogu. It has a different set of issues, but still has issues that make it very complicated to place. All right, so first, a little recap. Mandalorian season 1 is in 9 ABY. Everyone agrees with that. And here we can see the timeline book telling us 9 ABY. Great. Mandalorian season 2 is also in 9 ABY. I don't think that comes as a big surprise, but yeah, the timeline book tells us that for certain. The shocker when the timeline book came out is that the Book of Boba Fett, the entire season, mind you, is also in 9 ABY. Oh my word. So, yeah, that is a whole lot of the Mandoverse stuck in 9 ABY, both seasons of Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. Now, why was that so shocking, in particular, Book of Boba Fett? Well, that means that Luke didn't spend a lot of time with Grogu. I mean, couldn't have been more than a month or two, probably. So let's look at some interesting and confusing quotes from Jon Favreau about just how long Luke spent with Grogu. So here we see this article where Jon Favreau is suggesting that Grogu was with Luke Skywalker for up to a year. Speaking with IGN, he revealed Grogu was probably 53 years old in Mandalorian Season 3, implying each season, including Book of Boba Fett, lasted roughly a year. This corresponds with what was seen on screen and meant Grogu learned from Luke for several months to a whole year. More recently, however, Favreau revised this statement. Speaking to Sky Talkers, he explained that Grogu was rescued and spent many years with Mandalorian, went back with Luke Skywalker. Now he's been 2 years apart from him training. Whoa. So this is saying many years with the Mandalorian prior to him going to Luke Skywalker, and then 2 years with Luke Skywalker. You can add that all up, and that's like 4 years. Oh, but he changed his mind yet again. Shortly after he gave those statements, he then did an interview with Variety. And in that interview, he basically tried to make this all work out, right? He was unaware of the stir he had caused with his comments, which I think is hilarious. But he said, let me make this real clear. He said the timeline in universe is somewhat similar to the timeline where these shows come out. A year after The Mandalorian Season 2, we checked in with Din Djarin and Grogu in the Book of Boba Fett. A year after that, we're getting The Mandalorian Season 3. So in light of that, Favreau began to say the timeline in between Season 2 and Season 3 in universe was more than 1, but less than 2 years, only to then stop himself and say that it's somewhere between 0 to 2 years. Come on, man. I love Jon Favreau. Dude is the best. But was he just like drunk this morning? How did he go all over the place with this? Just tell us how many years there are between these. So notice he finally says 0 to 2 years. That is incredibly unhelpful. Now, here's what's interesting. This interview was March 6th of 2023. I think some of the reason he was trying to clarify things and straighten it out is because guess what came out a month later? That was the Star Wars Timelines book, which told us officially that there's no way that Luke and Grogu were together for more than a couple of months, and that in fact, Mando Season 1 and Season 2 and Book of Boba Fett all happened in the same year. So someone probably just tapped him on the shoulder and said, yeah, just stop talking. The book's coming out. It's going to explain everything. But still, even though we now know, at least what was in 9 ABY for certain, we still don't know the amount of time between Mando Season 2 and Season 3. So let's set that aside for a second and let's move on to Ahsoka, because we're going to see that Ahsoka tells us exactly when Mando Season 3 is happening. Okay, so during the Ahsoka series, they're talking about the conflict on Mandalore, and in particular, Gideon, right? Moff Gideon. And that's referring to, well, the final 2 episodes of Mando Season 3. So that's telling us 100% that Ahsoka is happening after Mando Season 3. Keep that in mind. So if we can place Ahsoka on the timeline, that will help us with Mando Season 3. Okay, so do we get some specifics in Ahsoka Season 1? No, we do not, because we have the speaker saying on this day, several years ago, the Empire was defeated. Why won't you just tell us how many years? It's not that hard to tell us this information, but they did not. And then later, we had them talking about Grand Admiral Thrawn and saying, but how is that possible that he's back? He disappeared years ago. How many years? It's just like they're trolling us intentionally. Come on, you're killing me. Well, anyway, let's now turn to secondary media. We're not getting it in the primary media, the show itself. So what do we learn from some of these magazine articles? Well, Star Wars Insider did give us some specific information while they were talking about episode number 7 of Ahsoka Season 1. They told us that it is 9 years after Star Wars A New Hope. Oh, thank goodness. I don't know why they couldn't have just told us that during the actual season. I don't know. But nonetheless, they've given us the answer. But wait, are you thinking the same thing I'm thinking? Oh, my word. That means all of this is happening during 9 ABY. What on earth? So Mando season 1, 2, and 3, Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka are all in 9 ABY? Oh, that just hurts my head. That really hurts my head, especially because in Mando season 3, we get the impression, at least, that on Navarro, some time has passed. I mean, here we see how beautiful the city looks. We hear them announcing, "Welcome to the port of Navarro, gem of the outer rim." I mean, Mando says what we're all thinking, right? A lot has changed around here. And then we have Grief Karga. Man, R.I.P. Carl Weathers. What a cool dude. I miss that dude. Anyway, he says, "I know we've done a lot with it." Well, apparently you did a lot with it all during 9 ABY, because that's what they told us, right? That Ahsoka is happening 9 years after Star Wars A New Hope. Oh, my word. So I'm really, really hoping that when the next version of the timeline book comes out, that they, retcon, ignore, whatever you want to say, that I mean, it was just something in one little magazine. That's it. They can easily ignore this. And they could push Mando season 3 into 10 or even 11 ABY, and likewise with Ahsoka. But for now, I got to go officially with all of that stuff is happening in 9 ABY. Okay, what about Skeleton Crew? Do we get anything with that? Nah, I mean, sorta. I mean, they tell us that it's set in the Ahsoka Mandalorian time frame. So they're basically punting and going, let Ahsoka and Mandalorian figure themselves out and then put us in the same place. Which means for now, that means Skeleton Crew is also happening in 9 ABY. It's hurting my head. It's just hurting my head. Okay, so finally, let's talk about then Mandalorian and Grogu. When is that happening? Well, nothing in the movie that I could tell. If you notice something in the movie, let me know. I mean, obviously it's happening after Mando season 3, but beyond that, who knows? However, this is interesting. They do tell us after years on the run that, the movie's occurring. And this is from StarWars.com, so that means we should trust it. So, okay, that's saying that, whenever they got together for the first time, Grogu and Din, which we know was 9 ABY, it has been years later. So, all right, at a minimum, that's 2 years. At a minimum, could be up to 3 years. And of course, if they move Mando season 3 and Ahsoka later in the timeline, it could be even further down the line. But for now, I'm going to go with 2 years later, which would be 11 ABY. So, all right, let's place this stuff on our timeline. So originally, I just punted on Maul Shadow Lord, had no clue when to put it. I put 18 BBY maybe. Now I'm going to go officially with, I think it is 17 BBY. And then as for Mandalorian and Grogu, I went with 10 ABY, maybe. But now I'm officially going to go with 11 ABY. So, all right, I don't know what to do any better than this, but I think for now, we just have a ton of stuff in 9 ABY, which is really sloppy, in my opinion, and they got to fix that with the next timeline book. And then for Maul Shadow Lord, could be 17, could be 16, but yeah, I'm going to go with 17 BBY. But it is worth noting that I do have other timelines as well. And in fact, for Tales of the Jedi, we talked a lot about episode number 6, the Ahsoka episode over there, which again, I have in 19 and 12 BBY. And then for Tales of the Empire, we talked about the Barriss episode number 5, which I have in 17 BBY. And then I also have timelines for Tales of the Underworld. I didn't bring up the Asajj Ventress timeline because I do place that in 18 BBY, basically during Bad Batch Season 3. So I don't think that it really has any influence on when Maul Shadow Lord takes place. I do also have timelines for the Cal Kestis games. I mean, that's at least a pretty easy one to do, right? And then I even have a timeline for how Andor and Rebels episodes fit together, trying my best to synchronize those. So, all right, let me know. What do you think about the timeline placements for Maul Shadow Lord and Mandalorian and Grogu? And what things do you think Lucasfilm should consider doing to help make more sense out of the timeline? I mean, the timeline isn't the most important thing. The story is the most important thing. But still, it's a connected universe. We like to know when the timeline is. So let me know your thoughts, because I love to read and respond to everything. And don't forget, we have a June contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out. And I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the Star Wars timeline section. And I got to call out MC Lego Boy. Dude has some of the best information and best ideas for how things fit in the timeline. So yeah, join us and you can talk about the conversation as well. Plus, we also have the Doomsday Countdown every day listed here at 7 p.m. Eastern. We watch a different movie or show as we head towards the December 18, 2026 release of Doomsday. So we have 2,700 members across the globe. Conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we will all eagerly await the release of Ahsoka Season 2.